Hey everybody, welcome to Monday. Success! I did actually get my first COVID vaccine on Friday. Yay. My arm is still sore. It's like tetanus shot sore territory. But otherwise side effects were pretty minimal. I felt like I was coming down with something Friday night and then had really weird ass dreams on Saturday, like sleeping Friday to Saturday, and then Saturday I was okay. I did 4 loads of laundry, even though my arm is sore. Maybe that's why my arm is still sore. I'll do a boss fight update tomorrow, so I don't bombard you with like preamble here. What we're talking about today is a defensive AAA games. You know that from the title of this video. If you like this sort of stuff, core gameplay doesn't tend to like do great on the YouTube algorithm, but I enjoy doing it and I think it's actually useful. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Okay, so this came about because some of you know I took a lot of crap on my opinions about The Last of Us 2. And so I've avoided zombie games since then, but Days Gone was the game of the month last month for PSN, and I started playing it on Twitch last Thursday, and I got almost instantly hooked. I thought before this game, I was just done with zombie games. I was burned out on the zombie genre. I didn't like it anymore. If it was zombies, I wasn't interested in it. Previous to Ghost of Tsushima, I actually thought I was just burned out on AAA gaming completely. But I'm loving Days Gone. And on paper, I should not love Days Gone because it's a white, straight, cisgendered male protagonist with a woman in refrigerators backstory and all that stuff, and I ended up going, so what? And the reasons why, I stopped myself there and went, Leanna, why are you thinking this way? Because you're one of the biggest like inclusion people out there. Why is this hitting you this way? A few reasons. The biggest one is that Days Gone mechanically, not story, not setting, nothing like that. Mechanically, how it plays. Days Gone feels like the game The Last of Us 2 was trying to be, but whereas Days Gone just made a good AAA game, Last of Us 2 overthought the process and got too hung up on subverting expectations. Now, I've been sitting with the whole subverting expectations thing for a while. And I've determined that subverting expectations is actually a hoity-toity multiple syllable way of saying shock value. Why do I say this? Well, with consumer bases or player bases as big as a AAA game has, it's impossible to predict every player's expectations, right? I mean, I figured out the twist in Death Stranding about halfway through the game. That is not the expectation. The expectation with Death Stranding is that the big twist is a surprise to the player, but it was actually there if you paid attention. The game didn't hinge on it being a big shock. I still enjoyed it, even though I figured it out. And that's a well-told thing, right? When you try to subvert expectations and you misdiagnose the expectation, you end up with a shit ton of dissonance, right? And that's what happened to me with The Last of Us 2. That game just made me angry because it kept guessing at how I was going to feel about something and guessing wrong. And here's the thing, you can do that in a movie and you have much greater wiggle room, right? When you try to force expectations on a player in a game, it's not as easy to do for a few reasons. One is that gameplay relies on expectations because it's a challenge and reward system, right? It's not like a movie where the reward is entertainment, right? With a game, you have to give players a skill that they learn and master, and they get something for getting good, whether that be advancing in the story, a new level, new gear, something, right? Players complete tasks expecting to be rewarded somehow. Problem with The Last of Us 2 was I felt utterly lost the whole time. Things were happening and people were getting killed and skills were, there'd be this, do this to do this. Okay. And I do it 1, 2, maybe 3 times. And then it was just a walking simulator for 20 to 30 minutes. And I forgot how to do the damn thing because the muscle memory didn't form. They got so obsessed with story that they neglected the gameplay. With Days Gone, I am really impressed, and possibly because it hinges on a lot of cliche story beats. They got into it really fast. Very quickly, within the first 2 hours of playing the game, I'd say within the first 45 minutes of playing the game, actually more, they got in really quick. I knew who this guy was, what he was supposed to do, and why I should care very, very quickly. And then they got into the freaker hordes being legitimately freaking terrifying. It's been a long time since anything in a zombie game actually managed to scare me. But the best part of the whole thing is that I immediately got an idea of what I'm doing and why I should care quickly. It wasn't what, who, what. Suddenly I'm playing as a totally different person. And that's the difference between making a movie or a concept for an HBO series and making a game, especially a AAA game. In a AAA game, the gameplay is the story. Yes, pretty graphics. There's a place for that. That's a big hallmark of AAA games. Personally, I prefer what they did with Final Fantasy, making it more sort of Final Fantasy Remake, making it sort of surrealistic, super pretty, as opposed to realistic. Just because that's where I'm at, right? But there's nothing wrong with realistic graphics as long as the system can actually run it. For me, Final Fantasy VII didn't quite hit AAA mark just because of all that pad in the middle, where nothing really happened. You were fighting all these monsters, which, you know what? Useless fighting monster grinding is a damn sight better in a video game than walking around controlling the character while they talk. At least you're erring on the side of kind of pointless gameplay as opposed to erring on the side of the pointless no gameplay, right? But I wouldn't say Final Fantasy VII is straight up AAA just because there was the story and then there was the gameplay, and the two things really didn't have much to do with each other. A true AAA game, the gameplay is the bulk of the story. Yes, there's a story, but AAA games are interactive action movies, right? And the bulk of an action movie is the action sequences. Well, in a AAA video game, the player is the one providing those action sequences, choreographing those action sequences. And so when you talk about what happens in the story, a lot of the most important parts are supplied by the player, not the pre-existing narrative, unlike in a film where every action sequence is tightly controlled. That's a huge, huge, huge difference. And that's what I realized about Days Gone and why it didn't bother me at all that Deacon was just another, WSCM, white, straight, cisgender male, with a fridge backstory. I'm being reductive because reasons and no spoilers, okay? The protagonist of the playable character of Days Gone could have been about any Joe Blow with trauma who was violent enough to survive a zombie apocalypse, okay? So the redneck element, and I don't say redneck as a pejorative. Up where I live, people are just rednecks. It's just an indicator. It's not a bad word up here. Um, the fact that he's a redneck is just because the game is set in rural Oregon. It really does not matter. It wouldn't have been a different story if Deacon was a black dude or a Hispanic dude or whatever. It's this universal thing. The fact that he's male isn't even all that relevant, other than maybe the upper body strength to like knock out zombies with a 2x4 with nails jammed into it, right? If you've lost someone who's too kind for this world, you can relate to Deacon's story, and that's it. That's it. It fulfills the why should I care quotient. I do not play video games to imagine I am the main character. I play video games for interesting gameplay with interesting pretense. And that was another thing I realized, and why everybody I know who's an adult who utterly loved The Last of Us 2 is a guy. And I have guys, I had multiple guys say to me, "Do you think you'd have liked the game better if you hadn't Twitch streamed it?" I'm like, that is fucking insulting. But I streamed Days Gone and I loved it. I streamed Ghost of Tsushima and I loved it. I streamed Final Fantasy VII and I was really enjoying that game until it sagged in the middle. The problem with The Last of Us 2, the pretense with The Last of Us 2, the subverting expectations, the game seems to think I should care about two vile human beings who solve problems with murder because they're women who lost father figures. And the problem with this is the game fails a ludonarrative proverbial Bechdel test, which is two women talking to each other about something other than a man. Because it's two women who hate each other because her dad killed your dad, and then I came back and killed your foster dad. Like, if that's the high watermark, right? And people can go, no, they talked about something before. No, the reason I should care about these women and why they hate each other and why they're trying to kill each other is because of men. At that point, if this is the high watermark, I'm not going to quibble about things like women in refrigerators. Because, let's face it, even when it is the dude who gets killed, that's all the bloody game is about. The two women involved don't need to make sense as people. We don't need to understand why they are acting like lunatics. It's just, oh, you should care. Because they're women. Look how much they cared about these guys who are no longer around. It just seems like, ironically, presumed male fantasy wish fulfillment. Presumed male fantasy wish fulfillment. I say that phrase ironically, do not freak out. Let's flip over to Days Gone, okay? And it's women in refrigerator thing. In this case, it wouldn't matter if, it was Sarah who was the main character and Deacon who was the one who died. Or there was Deacon who was, the main character, Sarah who's the one who died. We care about Deacon because he's a person who lost another person, Sarah, and is caring for another person, Boozer. And, okay, you can't really get away with a best bro named Boozer unless your main character's a redneck. You just can't. And again, redneck is not a pejorative term. I know some people are bothered by redneck, but in this case, it's a game about rednecks. It leans into that, okay? There is nothing inherently male about Deacon's story. Nothing. There is nothing inherently white or straight or cisgender about Deacon's story. Anybody can put themselves in this situation of loss and trauma and relate. Everything else is just a coat of paint, right? What the player cares about, because it's a AAA game that's heavy on the gameplay, is the crafting is meaningful. It's heavily gamified, but it's meaningful. It's not crafting to put in crafting, okay? Resource management is well balanced. I'm playing on hard mode, it's probably way off on normal mode. I'm glad I picked hard mode. Because on hard mode, the resource management is well balanced. I do have situations where I run out of everything and have to run around scrounging during the battle, and it's freaking great. And the shooty in the melee is fun. That's a AAA experience. The problem is that critics are no longer rewarding a solid AAA experience. It's very AAA is now used as a pejorative. And if something is very much the thing it's supposed to be, there's nothing wrong with that, right? That football game was so football. That car is such a car, right? It's ridiculous. That's more to the point. That sports car, it's such a sports car. You know, like, why are you insulting the thing for being what it is? That doesn't make any sense. Except, it does make sense if obsession with story, what they consider narrative by critics, is destroying their ability to reward good games that work as games. Yes, it's very AAA, which means the story's not going to be spoon-fed to you because the story is what you make it. The story is what Deacon does or whatever AAA protagonist does, going from point A to point B, much more than what happens at point A, what happens at point B, what happens at point C. Because it's a game, not a movie. Ironically, more and more movies are being rewarded for that. Film critics don't care whether the point A, the point B, or the point C is terribly interesting. It's what the character does and how the character feels going from point A to point B to point C that's interesting. If you look at the Oscar bait films this year, most of them are like that, right? And I think part of the problem is a lot of game critics are failed screenwriters, right? And so they still see things through that lens. They want a great story, not recognizing that in a AAA game, hell, a lot of indie games now, the story is what the player makes, right? And so I repeat, if you look at the games that were awarded in terms of game of the year and narratives and all that stuff, it was all things that were either interactive movies like The Last of Us 2, or Bless Hades, games that had pretty deliberately repetitive gameplay. Hades got really repetitive to the point that the game makes jokes about having to fight the Bone Hydra again and again and again and again. But that game had utterly damn gorgeous art, an interesting reimagining of various Greek gods, and really good voice acting. And those seem to be the two games that were vying for Game of the Year. And as much as I love Supergiant's business practices, and as much as I really reward their putting their business practices where their mouth is regarding crunch, you can't compare the gameplay in that game to something like Doom Eternal or even Ghost of Tsushima. There just isn't the level of complexity. And that's not to say that I don't see a lot of merit to Hades. Hades was this close to being a really super great game if they'd overcome that first third of the game just lull in progression that I think makes it far less accessible to people who are not really down with roguelikes. When the story finally does start peeling back, it's very interesting. It just takes too long to get going. And I do find the spam, the on-screen spam, I realized, especially with the fist weapon, I couldn't see what I was doing. I was going based on memory. I wasn't paying attention to what the screen was telling me because there was just too much splatter on screen. I couldn't see what I was doing. But still, if I had to say Game of the Year from Hades and Last of Us 2, Hades. Hades, Hades, Hades. Yes, Hades. 100%. Because there's a game there that functions as a game. And it's game first. And what seems to be rewarded in terms of narratives, storytelling, is the ability to tightly control the story as if they're creating a backdoor pilot for an HBO series. And I think that Game Awards may want to consider dividing the storytelling categories into that traditional narrative category that rewards tightly controlled storytelling and kind of an interactive thing, an interactive category that actually rewards emergent gameplay. Emergent story is the wrong term, but gameplay that functions as story, basically. I mean, games like Far Cry, games like Days Gone, no, they're never gonna win in a narrative category because the player is supplying the story, right? Deacon sneaks into a freaker nest, picks up the Nero beacon, uses the Nero injector, listens to the audio recording. This is not something the game is setting. This is something the player is doing, and it gets neglected how challenging it is to create that experience that isn't tightly controlled. The player can do all those things in any order they want, and it still works. It's just fine. The story doesn't fall apart. There's not obvious moments of dissonance. That is its own skill. That is something AAA gaming has really led the way on. And I think the problem is that when a AAA game does its job, people no longer see the gameplay because it's so finely tuned. And it takes a game like Ghost of Tsushima that is so stylized to make me remember, oh yeah, I'm pushing buttons and making things happen. When a AAA game does its job, you don't notice the effort you're putting in. That's why they call it intuitive design. And the problem is that the minute a game does that, it's no longer an awards darling. Because it's not trying hard enough to subvert expectations, right? The problem with a game like Days Gone is that unlike Ghost of Tsushima that kind of got neglected, they did a big push and then didn't talk about it very much, the fans found that game. For whatever reason, I think because it was a zombie game when everybody was kind of fed up with zombie games, Days Gone didn't get picked up that way. And so the studio didn't get its due in terms of fan accolades. I didn't bother to play it when it first came out because people were kind of meh on it. The reviews weren't that great. There wasn't a ton of marketing push behind it. And so I wrongly assumed something must be wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with that game. In fact, it does a lot of things really, really right. It does interesting things with the weapon wheel. People are saying, it annoyed me. I did the wrong thing sometimes. That's the point. It's supposed to be like fumbling around in a pack. I found that really, really interesting. What they did with the zombie hordes was freaking awesome and terrifying. There's some graphics load issues, but maybe it'll find a new life on a PS5, on the PS5. And that's part of the reason that I'm doing this video is it is a really good game as a game, and it didn't get its due. And maybe we won't get a Days Gone 2 because of what happened behind the scenes and so on and so forth with Bend. But now that I've gotten to it, I want to give the game its due. And we need to reward games like this that work really well as games and let developers know that while critics want developers to jump through hoops and reinvent the wheel and break things until they're mush just so you can be artful, that's not what a regular person playing a game to like reduce stress and be taken away from their troubles wants. And I think we have to start rewarding the elements of games that actually make people want to play them. And, this is what I found so interesting. Playing The Last of Us 2 constantly felt like an attack on me. You should like this. You're female. I don't believe I was the target for that. I think The Last of Us 2 was a game where an overwhelmingly male dev team made a game for themselves, hired a couple women, let them draw fire for a lot of decisions that probably weren't made by them because they weren't senior making decision people enough to do it. And Last of Us 2 is a game for guys that tried to claim that it was about women when it really wasn't. It was about the legacies of two men acting through their vengeful, violent, totally screwed up daughter figures. Days Gone doesn't attempt the pretense. It's just, this is a game about a redneck dude who's really sad and like fucked up in his PTSD. That's way more honest. And so I'm able to connect with this game as a human being. Again, not thinking I'm Deacon, just using Deacon as an entry point into a world that I find fun and sufficiently challenging. And I just wish that we could have more games like the highly excellent Horizon Zero Dawn that are games that use a female main character in a much more sci-fi fantasy setting as an entry point into a game that's fun to play and sufficiently challenging. That's another game I really recommend. But can we just, the process to get a non-white character, the process to get a female playable character through the approval process is just so damn hard that, I don't think people writing about games, I don't think people playing games understand, because they haven't had the conversations with developers that I do, how hard they're trying to get characters that aren't Deacon, through. But frankly, I'd rather have experiences that don't insult my intelligence any day over this game's a hot mess, but you better like it because you're a woman. And if you want female playable characters, you better say you like this game. No, I'm not going to play that game. No. I've been a gamer since 1981. Okay, I've gone through waves where there are a lot more female playable characters, like the PlayStation 1 era. Fuck. The Nintendo era. I was in the Atari era where playable characters were like, oh, look, you're a race car. Look, you're a spaceship. Look, you're a gun. Right? And then we got into the X-Pro era where everything just took a shit. But I'm like, no, we just have to get back to where we were. Furry playable characters and all, yay Ratchet and Clank. We have to get back to where we were like the PS1 era. We don't have to create some new paradigm, right? Like, let's just go back to where we were like PS1 era. And I mean, Lara Croft started off as Laura Cruz, who was Hispanic. So we don't even have to say like, have more diverse casting, because people were going there anyway until Xbox's marketing strategy just douched the whole thing up. Douche-broed the whole thing up. So, let's pay attention to gameplay when we're talking about video games. Please, 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 please. Thank you, because I'm tired of being used as a proxy for shit just because of my gender. Yay, Days Gone. Okay, if you like this sort of analysis as like, bleh, as it is, I'm not angry. I'm just having fun with this. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.